I work for a police department that services an inner city downtown area of a metropolitan area that I will not name. I've worked this beat for a stretch since 2001, and during that time I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff. Most of it pretty mundane, just human depravity and crime. But there was one call that we got that was beyond anything I'd ever seen, beyond what most of us had seen inside our department. It started as most of our other calls do. We were summoned to one of the many dilapidated apartment complexes that line the downtown district. Crumbly old brick buildings that were circling the drain of demolition. Not just any old complex though. It was one of the worst ones on the block. And I mean that very seriously. My partner and I were en route. I hooked around the car and zipped over to the property. I stepped out of the cruiser, my eyes scanning the apartment complex. This place is a hellhole. Drug addicts loitering in the parking lot. Dealers operated with impunity, and violent crime was a regular occurrence. My partner Lewis nodded at me as we approached the entrance. "You ready for this?" I nodded, my hand resting on my gun. We've been called to this complex before, but never for a dead body. The dispatcher's voice had been tight, her words laced with a hint of dread. "Officers, we have a report of a deceased individual inside Building C. Please use caution." As we entered the property, which was still open air, the stench hit us like a punch to the gut. Urine, sweat, and human shit mingled in the air, making my stomach turn. Lewis and I exchanged a look, our eyes communicating the same thought. This is gonna be bad. What kind of people could live here? I tried to not be too judgmental, but the whole area smelled like the scene of a crime. Just didn't know which. It smelled like death, like rotting sex, like all manner of undesirable activity. Trash lined every walkway, piles of dog shit in every greenbelt, all kinds of vandalism, from broken windows to spray paint. We navigated the dimly lit buildings, our footsteps echoing off the walls. Building C was in the back of the complex. We had to wind our way through the maze of the bullshit just to reach it. Every step felt like a countdown to something fucked up. Something I didn't want any part of. "You been out here before?" I asked Lewis. "Yeah, but just for a wellness check." "How'd that go?" I followed up. "Good," came his response. "Way better than this." I laughed and pushed on. I'd been on the job a little longer than Lewis, so I didn't hesitate to lead us along. He trailed behind me just a few steps, keeping an eye on the place that I couldn't. Dingy little cutouts, entrances to buildings, that kind of thing. I had my eyes forward, looking for suspicious people moving fast, anything that might give away a suspect. Then we both saw it, a big white C painted on the outside of a building. I waved Lewis up so he was level with me. I didn't want to be entering solo and run into trouble when I had a partner to prevent that kind of thing from happening. We didn't draw our weapons, just got to the door and opened it, took a look inside. The landing was clear, so we proceeded in, left the door ajar behind us. As Lewis noticed, it had an auto-locking feature. It was the kind of door that required a key or a code to typically open, but someone had left it open for us. Finally, we arrived at the entrance, at the scene of the crime. The door itself was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my gun drawn. Lewis was covering me, his eyes scanning the stairwell. And that's when we saw it, the body, lying in the middle of the stairs, like a macabre welcome mat. People had been walking by this guy for hours, maybe even longer. The smell was rank. The scene was ominous and weird. Lewis and I exchanged a look, our faces grim. This was no ordinary call. I put my gun away. I scanned the hallways for any signs of commotion, any sign of blood. Couldn't tell if this guy had been coming down from the second floor or if he'd be climbing up from the first. It was a perplexing thing to walk up on. There wasn't a soul around to explain any of this. As we jammed a floor mat into the entrance to prevent a door from locking us out, a man emerged from one of the apartments. He approached us with a slow, deliberate stride, his eyes fixed on us like a predator sizing up his prey. "Can I help you, officers?" he asked, his voice bright and energetic. Lewis and I exchanged another look. Something about this guy just didn't add up. His eyes were too calm, his demeanor too collected, especially given the circumstances. "Yeah, we're investigating a report of a deceased individual," I replied, my hand resting on my gun. I couldn't really decide if I wanted it out or not. Having a dead body so close just kind of had me on edge. It had me wanting the weight of the steel in my hands while I waited for investigators to show up. Lewis was already on the radio while I was speaking to the guy from the apartment. The man nodded, his eyes never leaving ours. "Yeah, I saw him. Poor guy. Must have been dead for hours." Lewis and I exchanged another look. This guy definitely knew more than he was letting on, and I had a feeling we were just scratching the surface of something seriously sinister. "Really? When did you see him?" I asked. "This morning. I was one of the people that called him in," he explained to me. Lewis was fully engaged with the radio at this point, relaying all the details. "Do you recognize him?" "No, I don't think so. I've never seen him inside this building." "But he could live on the property in a different building maybe," I clarified. The guy shrugged and just said, "I guess." I turned back to Lewis to get the scoop. He told me dispatch had all the details and sent over additional personnel. We were trying to keep everything nice and tidy until they arrived. We did a quick patrol of the halls on the first floor, then went up the stairs to inspect the next level. It was even quieter up there, but somewhere deep inside the building, I could hear a baby crying. Part of me thought this guy had kids in his unit. Whatever the case, the whole thing just kind of made me sad. We went back to the stairwell and decided to examine the body. Checked his pulse and got nothing. Looked over his clothing. Not one drop of blood, no leaking wounds. It was even stranger to see him up close. I mean, what could have killed this guy? He had some bruising on his face, but other than that, he didn't seem too injured. I assumed it was just drugs and went back down the stairs. "You questioned that guy downstairs?" Lewis asked me. "Yeah, he doesn't recognize this fella," I answered. "Says he doesn't live in the building." As we stood there trying to process the whole scene, I felt a sense of relief wash over me when I heard the sounds of sirens approaching us. More of our personnel were arriving. We wouldn't have to face this alone. Lewis and I exchanged one more look, and even the stranger from the apartment seemed to relax a little as we came down the stairs. As the additional officers and investigators arrived, the stranger was dismissed and returned back to his apartment, casting a nervous glance over his shoulder. I guess I really didn't blame him. I wanted to get out of there too. The strange part was, though, he didn't go back the way he'd come, which was from the first floor hallway. He went up the stairs to the second floor, then disappeared from view. I found that super weird in the moment, but not enough to say anything. Just figured maybe he went to a friend's unit after they discovered the dead body, so they didn't have to hide out alone while the cops came. But as we continued to examine the body more closely, our relief turned back to horror. The victim was in bad shape. Puncture wounds and abrasions covered his body from head to toe. It was as if he'd been tortured for hours, maybe even days. And yet when Lewis and I had arrived, we'd seen no blood, only weird markings on his clothes. And we even inspected him, so the investigators were looking at us funny for a minute. The issue, it turned out, was that all of this guy's wounds had been partially hidden by his clothes. He had long sleeves and pants on. His body was fully covered. And since his clothes didn't have any blood on them, we assumed there weren't any open wounds. Once he pulled his shirt up, we could see just how wrong we'd all been. Someone had stabbed him up and down with a knife, or some kind of nail or something, and there were burn marks all over his neck and chest. The investigators explained that the weird markings were waffle or grid pattern burn marks, a sign of prolonged torture. My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend what we'd stumbled upon. This wasn't just a dead body, it was a crime scene, a testament to some twisted individual's cruelty. And not just that, but their carelessness too. They didn't give a shit about who found this guy's body. The killer just discarded him where he fell and went on with the rest of his life. Lewis and I exchanged a look, our faces grim. We'd been so focused on securing the scene and gathering evidence, We hadn't realized the full extent of what we were really dealing with. Now as the truth sank in, fear crept up my spine. We had no leads, no suspects, and no idea of what kind of monster we were up against. The investigators began their work, collecting evidence and documenting every detail. But as I watched, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. We were in over our heads. That wasn't my place to say. I did some laps of the complex property, looking for suspicious cars or places where there might be blood, anything to help sort out the crime in hand. As the scene was processed, the reality of our situation hit me like a ton of bricks. We had a killer on the loose, someone who tortured and murdered this poor man without leaving a trace of evidence behind. And we were the only ones standing between him and his potential next victim. We had to catch this guy before he struck again. But as we gazed out into the darkness, I couldn't shake that feeling that we were already too late. I mean, way too late. Lewis and I aren't detectives or investigators of any kind. The moment the rest of the team showed up, he and I essentially were just security detail. We completely passed the case off. We're no longer involved starting that following day, just on to new calls, new problems, and new crimes of every caliber. Still, he and I thought about that corpse every day, every shift, wondering what the hell had gone on there. We kept up with our own duties, but Lewis and I would ask around, compare rumors every couple of days, trying to hear if anything more happened with that case. Nothing had come down the pipeline, so we just kind of had to take the loss. It was most likely just some drug deal gone wrong, but still, nothing could explain why that victim's wounds didn't bleed. It made no sense to anyone at all. That was one piece of information we did get, the autopsy results. The guy's corpse had been 100% drained of all its blood and fluids, hence why we didn't spot his wounds right away. Very strange. And some of the other officers in our department started spitting some truly crazy conspiracies. You know the kind: alien abduction, pagan rituals, satanic sacrifice. Something had to explain all those weird details, but alas, it looked like we were never going to get any answers. That wasn't until one day, around a month later, an arrest was made. Can you guess who? I didn't. When I saw this mugshot, and when I saw the guy getting led through the precinct and into a holding cell, I literally couldn't believe it. It was that friendly apartment dweller, the one that had been kind enough to help us out and answer the questions when Lewis and I first got to the scene. It was a bold damn maneuver to come right out to the police and start a dialogue about the crime you just committed. It actually left me pretty rattled. The full story was this. The man we encountered on the first floor, his name was Mike. And like I explained earlier, Mike lived on the second floor with his girlfriend Nina. The suspect, the dead guy on the stairs, his name was John. He was a friend of Mike and Nina's. John had come over to their place like he normally did to get drunk and high, bullshit around their apartment. Evidence indicated that there was possibly some kind of sexual connection, perhaps a love triangle of some kind, but none of that was ever confirmed. The three of them got drunk, then some kind of argument broke out. They were hollering at each other. Suddenly it got physical, wherein John likely tried to flee the apartment, but instead was attacked by both Mike and Nina, then knocked unconscious. What happens next is a bit unclear, but what from we gathered, Mike and Nina tied John to a chair, proceeded to torture him for the next 3 days, putting their cigarettes out on him, cutting him, prying his fingernails off, stapling his toes together. All kinds of sick and twisted rituals carried out on this poor guy. At some point on day 3, John's will to live completely gave out. His body failed, and he died in that apartment, strapped to a kitchen chair like an animal. Mike and Nina, not knowing what to do, had a pretty unique approach. They untied John and put his body in the bathtub, soaked him in the water for a bit. This made some of the bruising on his body go away, believe it or not. Then they drained the water, then proceeded to drain his body too. Punctures here and there, and just let him leak into the tub until nothing else came out. Nothing at all. From there, they dressed him in some random clothes, hauled him across the apartment, and literally threw his corpse down that stairwell, which is where Lewis and I came into the picture, around 10 hours later. It was a ruthless, godless act of violence. It warmed my heart and motivated me like nothing ever has when I heard both Nina and Mike were arrested and would be locked up for a very long time. The part that still haunts me though, the torture. The units in this apartment complex are very close together with sparse, thin walls separating each one. You can hear someone sneeze next door, let alone scream. No one in the entire complex called the police during those 3 days of torture. I suspect John was pretty loud. Even if they gagged him, it wouldn't take much sound to travel through those apartment walls. For 3 days? Again, the word I use to describe this event is godless. There were families living in that unit, couples, old folks, all different walks of life. If any of them heard John screaming at all, and I personally believe they did, not a single one of them called the police. No one even attempted to locate the person or dispatch assistance of any kind. They simply did nothing. And to me, a police officer, that might be the scariest part of all. Complete indifference to their peers and neighbors. How is anyone supposed to feel safe in a cold world like that? And that leads me to my last point. The fact that all these people were apparently friends. Most cops will tell you, cases we catch like this, the people always know each other. Best friends, siblings, you name it. They break the bond with guns and hammers and their bare hands. No, you can't trust your friend. You can't trust your neighbors. If there is a word to the wise, don't trust anybody. I've got a story, but it's maybe one you've heard. This was one that started as a small town tale, but over time it blew up into a national headline, especially after the case was closed. It isn't a mainstream case anymore, but there still are urban legends here and there about it, based on this real story, and it happened to me. I'll never forget that autumn evening in Ohio, the one that started like any other, but ended up in terror. I was a young cop then, still new to the job, and I'd earned a rare night off. My family and I settled into our cozy home, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. Back then, it wasn't often we all got a night in together. We just hung out, shared a meal, but soon everyone had their own methods of relaxation to get to. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over our little corner of the world, we each retreated into our own corners of the house. My wife snuggled up beside me on the couch. We watched TV together, the sound of laughter and gunfire from the show filling the room. Our son tinkered with his baseball gear in the kitchen, the clatter of metal and leather a familiar soundtrack to me. Our daughter Emily disappeared into her bedroom, the door closing behind her with a soft click. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. The TV show ended, I got up to grab a snack from the kitchen. And that's when I heard it. Emily's scream, piercing and raw, cutting through the silence like a knife. My heart skipped a beat as I froze, thinking that she'd seen a spider or something equally harmless. My daughter had this knack for this over-the-top reactions to very mundane things. Get a letter in the mail, screaming. Saw someone she recognized in another car at an intersection, hysterics. Found the thing that she was looking for under the bed, even more screaming. But then she screamed again, her voice rising to this hysterical pitch. I knew something was wrong this time. It wasn't an exited scream. It was the scream of someone begging for help. I sprinted down the hallway, my heart racing, and burst inside Emily's room. She was slumped against the far wall, her face deathly pale, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed a shaking finger at the window, her gaze fixed on something outside. Dad, there was a wolf, she stammered. I turned back to the window, which the blind had been pulled away from. As a father, I kind of made up this rule that my kids had to follow. Their blinds need to be closed at night, especially now that they were getting older. It was just a simple privacy concern, as well as security. So seeing them pulled apart, I figured she'd gone out to take a peek through a window, just saw something that scared her, probably her own reflection. Whatever the case, I went to the window and checked it out, but there was nothing there. total darkness, and a single buzzing lamppost out on the street. I went to Emily and just tried to calm her down, but she kept pointing, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. I followed her gaze, but all I saw was the night, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But Emily just kept repeating, "Wolf, wolf, it was right there." At this point, I'm getting a little agitated. I just needed the tiniest bit of clarity, anything that made sense. By this point, my wife and son are in the hall, wanting to come in but hesitating, which added another layer of pressure to this entire thing. I did all I could do. I took a deep breath, pulled my daughter in for a big bear hug, and just waited. She fought through the breathing, the tears, the hysterics, and finally just settled against me. I scanned the room, searching for any sign of what could have spooked her. There's nothing. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of any kind of intruder. Just Emily's terrified face, and the darkness outside seeming to press in on us. As she got a hold of herself, I took note of the supreme silence throughout the house now. Nothing but heartbeats and heavy breathing. The silence told me there was nothing to find. Whatever had scared her was in her head. But still, I had to be sure. "Emily, calm down, baby. What happened exactly?" I asked again. She slowly pulled away from my chest, where she'd left this big great stain from tears. She ran a hand over her cheeks and took a deep breath, then said again, "There was a wolf man outside my window." As she spoke, she started to teeter towards hysterics again. I grabbed her and got her to focus once more. I took a look outside the window and sized it up. It was only about 4 feet or so off the ground, so I figured a big dog maybe could have been passing by. Yeah, alright, she happens to open up her window. At the same time, this monstrous stray happened to be sniffing through. Not the most likely thing, but I guess it was possible. I could see it in my mind's eye, just a kid not paying attention, seeing half an animal through a window where there wasn't supposed to be anything. My wife and I soothed her, got her to relax, and then put the kids back down for bed. It was a bit early of a night, but with whatever that just went down, we'd just rather be safe than sorry. After we got their kids in their own rooms, I put my service belt on and went outside to inspect the house. I had a flashlight, a taser, handcuffs, a gun, and anything I met out there in my yard was going to be dead or dying by the time I got done with it. But again, there's nothing out there. I did 3 full laps of my property. Didn't turn up anything, not even a single footprint. No sounds, no evidence of anything being around. Finally, I clicked my flashlight off and just stood there in the darkness, waiting like a predator to see if anything stirred without the light. Nothing did. After 40 minutes of securing the yard, I went back inside, watched a little TV, then went to bed myself. Nothing else bothered us the rest of that night. Now, there's a bit of a lull in the story. Nothing else weird happened at my house after that. But about a week later, I noticed a report in the department that caught my eye. It was from an adult woman. She'd called dispatch in the middle of the night, reporting that a wolf was looking in her window. I didn't get tunnel vision, but my blood didn't run cold or anything. But man, I thought that was the weirdest thing ever. How could there be 2 people that saw the same strange sighting? It wasn't the same night as my daughter's experience, but within a couple of days. I asked around the department, but got a whole lot of nothing. No one had heard anything about wolves coming through town or big stray dogs lurking in any neighborhoods. Nothing of the sort. This just became a weird piece of information that I kept in the back of my head. Others in the department took note of my questions, that I was actively looking for any evidence of wolves or reports involving them. Sure enough, about a week later, my partner gave me a direct line. In fact, he called me before he'd even contacted dispatch or even the department. "What's up?" I asked over the radio. "You ever close the door on that wolf stuff that you were looking into?" I felt an anxiety bubble up in my guts. No, why? What'd you find?" "What had you looking for a wolf?" he pressed, ignoring my question. "Well, my daughter said that one was looking in her room the other night," I explained to him. I got a guy pulled over. I'm here on Concord and Mayfield. I think you should come take a look, was all he said. I might have found your wolf man. I loaded up and buzzed over to that intersection. Sure enough, Rodney had this little sedan pulled over and a really creepy looking guy sitting on the curb. He was pretty average, mid-height, mid-weight, medium build, probably in his mid-30s. What made him creepy though was his skin and his eyes. The guy was white like a sheet of paper. His eyeballs were almost entirely black. Just looking at him would give you the heebie-jeebies. "What do you got?" I asked. My partner gave me the lowdown. He'd gotten a call about a suspicious vehicle lurking in the neighborhood. By the time Rodney had gotten out there, the car was parked, and instead he found the driver poking around between the homes on the street. Looked like he was casing the neighborhood for places to break in and rob. That's when Rodney got involved, asked him to come over for some questions. They engaged in a little back and forth, wherein the driver acted more and more suspicious and got really weird, then just stopped answering questions altogether. Rodney went ahead and cuffed him, just in case, then did a quick pass over the car. He didn't do a full-on search, but just peeked in the back seat and revealed something: a werewolf mask, a pair of gloves, all tucked in this plastic shopping bag. It had been covered up with a dark coat, but now had come to be exposed just enough for my partner to see it. When he saw the fuzzy wolf features, he stopped and thought hard, then remembered me asking around the office for any leads on the wolf in town. The rest just kind of fell into place as he called me. I couldn't believe it. My daughter had been 100% correct when she screamed, said there was a wolf outside her window. Turned out this guy, who was named Dean Tomlin, had gotten his hands on a werewolf costume, was using it to disguise himself when he looked inside people's homes. He wasn't a thief, he was a pervert. Classic peeping Tom. He was just a smart one and had managed to avoid capture because of that weird costume. I let all of this spill to Rodney, who just nodded with a faraway look in his eyes. He looked pretty upset by the time I got done talking. "All right, so who knows about this?" I asked. "Nobody," Rod said, shaking his head. "I only called you." I didn't say anything, but Rod just kept giving me this look. "You know," he said, "figured you might want to rattle his cage a bit. Does he know you know about the wolf getup?" Again, Rodney just shook his head. He had me set up for some backwoods justice. I honestly wish I could say I'd done more with it, but I wasn't really about abusing power or abusing people. This asshole was going to get what was coming to him, so I just elected to amp up the fear a bit. I pulled my service belt up and marched over to Dean, who still sat on the curb. "Howdy, my friend," I slow rolled. "My partner over there thinks he might have made a mistake, wants me to deal with you. He feels a little embarrassed." "Oh, no problem," Dean said. I could almost see the hope bleeding back into his face, like he wasn't about to go down in the books. "I was just lost. I'm on the wrong street and I'm looking for my friend's house." I nodded along. "Happens all the time, no big deal. Not like you were stealing or anything," I encouraged. Now he nodded along. I mentioned that I was going to go get the keys for the cuffs. "Yep, just seems like one big misunderstanding," I started. "Oh, there was one thing that I wanted to ask you though." "Sure," Dean offered, happy to be of service. "What you got that werewolf costume in your backseat for?" I asked real slow. Dean then dried up like a wad of spit underneath the sun. He actually started to squirm around in his cuffs, sweat breaking out across his forehead. Still, he elected to give me this line of shit. What costume?" "The one that you tried to hide underneath your jacket. Probably the same one you wear with the mask, right? Big black coat?" That's just for a school play." "What school do you attend?" I asked. Even let some of the drawl come out, really let this guy stew. I don't, my cousin left it in the car." "Oh, okay. Well, let me ask you, were you over on Minnow Street the other night?" His brow furrowed, confused at first. "What?" I said, "Were you over on Minnow Street about a week ago, in the middle of the night?" His face started to come together in realization. You know, outside some little girl's window, peeking inside my fucking house. You were wearing that costume, weren't you? Almost made me think my daughter was crazy. I took long strides over to him, where Dean started to fuss, started to look to my partner for help. Rodney just had his arms across his chest, looking in the other direction. Just tell me yes or no. He stammered, started to cry, but he said yes. Honestly, I wish I could tell you that there was some big fight, some big public hanging, but that was pretty much it. I didn't lay a finger on the guy, just gave him this good verbal lashing, and then we took him downtown and booked him. It turns out all kinds of ladies had weird reports of this guy. They were just somehow getting piled together in a miscellaneous file, as our township isn't known for wolves. I felt like that was a pretty glaring issue with our department back then. Just a sheer lack of communication, lack of organization, lack of resources. Only to thank the same rationale and a little quick thinking did my partner put it together that this might be the guy or the thing that I've been asking about. It makes me happy to see all the great strides our law enforcement has taken to improve their abilities, technology, and just everything across the board. Back when it was just crackerjack cop work, I feel like it was a lot easier to miss little things like this. Dean went to jail. Not for very long, but spent several years on probation list, wherein he had to check in every few months with a PO that I personally knew. Let's just say I got to be in the room several times for his checkups. He was always on his best behavior when I attended. I didn't really do anything scary. I didn't even talk to him. But seeing him squirm in the PO office was always a really nice treat for me. As a cop, I've seen my fair share of strange things on the job, but one incident still sends shivers down my spine. It was during my first year on the force, and I was walking a solo foot post late one night. These are general commercial areas, and areas known for high rates of non-dangerous crime. You generally find exactly what you expect. Drunk people, people fighting, drug deals, car break-ins, that kind of thing. My partner had taken a meal break, leaving me to cover the post alone for the next hour. I decided to make the most of it and walk from the north end of my post to the south, passing a few abandoned lots that were pretty notorious for attracting vagrants and drug users. I couldn't tell you why I decided to take that route alone, maybe boredom most likely, but after this night though, I didn't take any more solo tours of that neighborhood ever again. As I walked by one of the lots, I thought I saw something moving fast at the far end, near the fence line. I shone my flashlight in that direction, but didn't see anything. I shrugged it off as a trick of the low lighting, thinking my eyes were now playing tricks on me. No big deal, right? I kept walking down the lane a ways, alert to whatever might be around me. Like I said, this area was a high traffic for all kinds of racket, so running into something was about the norm. Literally a 50-50 shot. Then I heard someone coughing, clearing their throat. Whipped around to find a pair of guys coming up hot behind me. I cleared my own throat, then hit them with the high beam. "Good evening," I said. They nodded and just continued on their way. They didn't seem too intimidated by my presence, so I gave them the benefit of the doubt. No harm, no foul. I'm not about jamming people up. Either way, I followed them at a distance for a bit. Not on purpose, they just happened to pass me when I stopped to greet them for a moment before. Soon enough though, they crossed over to the other side of the street, then disappeared down this little alley. They never ran, never made any weird sounds or any other movements, just normal dudes on a midnight stroll, I guess. Still, being alone out there, and being so new, I was still on edge. As I turned away, the fence on the far side of the lot suddenly rattled again, giving that distinctive chain link sound that sends chills down your spine. I stopped dead in my tracks and looked back, feeling a sense of unease wash right over me. First the shadow, then the guys behind me, and now this. It was literally one thing after another, and at this point, I was seriously regretting setting out solo. There's a true value to having a partner with you, to having two sets of eyes to shift between terrain. Alone, I could only look at one place at one time, and every time I turned my back, something new presented itself. I put my light on that area again, and this is when I saw him. A man just standing there, looking straight ahead, but not quite at me. He didn't seem like the homeless or the type of guy who hangs out in abandoned lots late at night. In fact, he kind of looked out of place, like he didn't belong. I asked him what he was doing, but he just stood there, not responding to me. I asked again, my voice a little louder, but still, no response. I told him to come over here, that he shouldn't be inside that lot, but he just stood there, like a statue. I decided to call it in over the radio before approaching, my heart beating a little faster.
Post 4 Central, show me one male stopped at XXXZ Street. Back lot, no further, no emergency.
I was approaching him now, as the guy looked like he was either having an episode of some kind or was just honestly lost. Either way, I wanted to try to help. Like I said, I'm not really about jamming people up. This was a dangerous hood, so if this guy was lost or mentally unwell, I wanted him back in a safe location where he could get himself sorted out. As I got closer though, I realized he was just looking over my head, as if there was something floating right above me. It was weird, whenever I moved, his eyes would move. At one point, I even looked up to find, of course, nothing above me. "Sir?" I called out again. "No," he finally broke out and said something like, "Don't bring it over here." Now I really paused. Bring what over where? I took a look around me and around the lot. Saw no one or nothing. This pretty much confirmed my suspicion. This guy was definitely having an episode of some kind. Considering I didn't know him, I didn't want to approach too quickly or agitate him in any way. When people have these bouts of mental unrest, they become unpredictable, and no two people react the same way. I just want to be a calm, protective presence for this guy. "No, get the fuck away from me," he screamed, never even looking at me once. Whatever he was afraid of, apparently was in the air right above my head. "Sir," I started. "You're making it way worse. Just go away. Please, go." I shook my head and did the only thing that I could think of. I walked into the lot, hopped over the small fence to get where he was standing. He has to be high or something, because he looked like he had no idea where he even was. He got real worked up again when I started to climb the fence, but then just went vacant again, staring off into nothing like a drone. His face was totally vacant. I jumped down to the other side, checked my perimeter, and then continued on my way towards the confused guy. But as I looked up, he was gone, vanished. I took my eyes off of him for 2 seconds and he was gone. No sound from the far fence chain, no rustling, no nothing. I scanned that entire lot, wondering where the hell this guy just went. I looked behind the only real cover, a dumpster, but he wasn't there either. I mean it when I say I was spooked. This guy was screaming at me literally 2 seconds ago, then completely vanished without a word. The whole encounter was just creepy. I remember walking back and forth in a stupor, as if I had no idea what to do. Go back to patrol and pretend like that didn't just happen? I know that's what a lot of people would do, but I'm too much of a realist. Something weird happened back here in the blink of an eye. I wanted to know how, and I wanted to know why. Central raised me a minute later, asking for a status update. I hesitated for a moment before responding.
109198. Non-crime corrected. Resuming patrol.
To this day, I think I saw a ghost, as crazy and as weird as that sounds. I've never told anyone about what happened that night, not even my partner. It's just a memory that I've kept locked away, but it still haunts me. I know there's a chance that maybe he hopped the fence without me hearing it and just took off. But in that amount of time it took me to hop a 4-foot fence, highly unlikely. Here's the truly weird part and why I never told anyone, not even my partner. I completed that foot route earlier than expected. Decided to meet up with my partner at the place that he was eating. This little Mexican joint that stayed open 24 hours. I think I just wanted company at that point. The encounter I just had with that vanishing creepy guy had terrified me to a point that I didn't want to be alone. I found the spot and just rolled in, thinking I'd get some chips and a soda maybe. Something to fill my stomach and just take the edge off. To my disbelief and absolute horror, I stop inside that Mexican food restaurant, see my partner standing by the soda machine. And who is he talking to? Then none other than that weird, confused guy that I just saw, standing in an empty lot a full mile away. He's wearing the same clothes, but they're a little different. It's hard to explain. It's like his clothes earlier were dirty, and the ones he had on now were pressed and pristine. I stood there in total shock as I watched them talk back and forth. The guy looked over my partner's shoulder right at me, gave me a little smile and a wink. He said goodbye to my partner, then walked right by me and through out the exit. My partner saw me at this point, waved, and then started filling up his soda. It took me a second to get into motion, as I was seriously in shock at this point. Just when it occurred to me, I turned around to get a second look at him, but of course, he was now gone. "You know that guy?" I asked. "Nope, some random guy. Why?" "Just curious," I said. "What do you want?" "Directions." And we just left it at that. I didn't want to know anything more about this weirdo. I knew then that I hadn't seen a ghost, but I definitely saw something, right? I don't really buy into the whole supernatural thing, but I've had multiple people tell me that that guy was a demon or a skinwalker or some such mystery monster that could change form or something. The only thing that I know is that he managed to disappear right in front of me. Maybe he was just a magician, practicing his latest trick. Either way, that incident left a mark on me. A reminder that there are things out there that we can't explain. Things that defy logic and reason. As a cop, it's a reminder that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real. They're waiting for us in the shadows, pretending like they don't know where they are.